In the pre-dawn stillness of November 20th, 1943, a quiet that would soon be shattered, the world was bracing itself for a battle unlike any other. On Betio Island, a tiny coral speck in the vast expanse of the Pacific, destiny was about to be decided, not just by grand strategies or naval might, but by the subtle, often overlooked mechanics of personal defense. Imagine, for a moment, the chilling scene. Thousands of American Marines wading through chest-deep water, their landing craft hung up on a cruel coral reef, 500 yards from a fortified shore. Every step was a struggle, every ripple in the water a potential marker for enemy fire. This wasn't just a physical test. It was a psychological gauntlet, a visceral plunge into the maw of combat where individual courage and the reliability of the tools in hand meant everything. As Japanese machine guns spat fire from concealed pillboxes, transforming the lagoon into a grotesque killing field, the Marines clutched their rifles, their grenades, and their sidearms. Among them, Staff Sergeant William Bordelon, with demolition charges packed securely, relied on his M1911A1 pistol, mechanically perfect despite being already soaked with seawater. Across the treacherous expanse, 4,500 Japanese defenders, under Rear Admiral Keiji Shibazaki, had transformed this less than 3-square-mile island into an impregnable fortress. Their officers, the stoic guardians of Imperial Japan's honor, carried the Type 14 Nambu pistol, the Empire's standard sidearm. This wasn't just a clash of armies. It was a stark, brutal demonstration of two fundamentally different philosophies of warfare, industrial capabilities, and, ultimately, of what truly makes an effective combat weapon. What unfolded over the next 76 hours on Tarawa would become a grim ledger, meticulously recording the lethal disparity between American and Japanese small arms design. In the suffocating intimacy of close-quarters hell, where combat distances collapsed from yards to feet, and often inches, the subtle differences between these two pistols were magnified into life-and-death verdicts. It was a brutal classroom where a 230-grain bullet, delivering a staggering 370 foot-pounds of energy, met a 100-grain projectile offering a meager 220 foot-pounds. This wasn't merely about velocity or caliber, it was about kinetic energy transfer, about immediate incapacitation versus a delayed, often insufficient response. The M1911A1, firing its devastating 45 ACP cartridge, would carve its legend into the very coral, while the Type 14 Nambu, with its underpowered 8mm round and fragile mechanism, would underscore the dire consequences of a nation's struggle to bridge a technological chasm. To truly understand the M1911A1, we must rewind the clock 4 decades, long before the thunder of naval bombardments echoed across the Pacific. Its genesis lies not in the sun-drenched islands of World War II, but in the steamy, unforgiving jungles of the Philippines during the Philippine-American War of 1899 to 1902. American troops there faced a terrifying existential problem, one that would force a complete reevaluation of military sidearm development. They were up against the Moro Juramentados, fierce Muslim warriors who, driven by fervent religious belief, would bind their limbs with leather to prevent blood loss and ingest native drugs to dull pain. These were not ordinary adversaries. They launched suicidal charges against American positions, seemingly impervious to conventional small arms fire. The standard Army sidearm of the era, the Colt Model 1892 double-action revolver chambered in .38 long Colt, proved catastrophically inadequate. Its 150-grain bullet, traveling at a modest 770 feet per second, simply lacked the kinetic energy transfer necessary for immediate incapacitation. Colonel Louis A. Lagarde, a medical officer and keen observer, meticulously documented these harrowing encounters in his reports. Soldiers would empty their entire revolvers into charging Moros, placing multiple shots center mass, only to watch in horror as their attackers continued their relentless advance, often killing Americans with blade weapons before finally succumbing. Lagarde's 1904 report recounted the chilling case of Antonio Caspi, shot 4 times at close range with 38 rounds, 3 bullets perforating his lungs, 1 passing completely through his body. Yet, Caspi continued fighting, still a lethal threat, until finally stopped by a rifle butt to the forehead. This wasn't just a failure of a weapon. It was a profound crisis of confidence, an unnerving realization that the very tools designed to protect soldiers were failing them in the most desperate moments. This abject failure ignited the most comprehensive ballistic study ever undertaken for military small arms, known as the Thompson-Lagarde tests of 1904. Colonel John T. Thompson, who would later achieve fame for developing the iconic Thompson submachine gun, and Major Lagarde of the Medical Corps, were tasked with a singular, crucial mission: to determine the minimum effective caliber for military pistols. Their methodology, while undeniably barbaric by modern ethical standards, was scientifically rigorous for its time. At the Nelson Morris Company Union Stockyards in Chicago, they conducted tests involving shooting live cattle and human cadavers with a range of calibers: 7.65 21mm parabellum, 30 Luger, 9 Howe 19mm parabellum, .38, long Colt, 38 ACP, .45, Colt, or 176 Ely, and .40 Webley. The tests were precise. For live animals, they recorded the time to incapacitation. For suspended cadavers, they measured body sway, a proxy for energy transfer. They conducted dissections to examine wound channels and even employed the newly developed X-ray technology to analyze bullet paths and tissue damage. The results were unequivocal, a damning indictment of smaller calibers. Animals shot with .30 Luger showed minimal distress even after 10 rounds. Those hit with 9mm, 38 calibers fared slightly worse but often required 8 or more shots to be put down. In stark contrast, animals struck with .45 caliber rounds typically collapsed by the 4th shot, displaying immediate and severe physiological trauma. The cadaver tests were even more dramatic. When bullets struck bone shafts, the .45 caliber rounds consistently produced 2 to 3 times more body oscillation than smaller calibers. The board's conclusion was absolute, a dictate born of empirical evidence and battlefield necessity. A bullet which will have the shock effect and stopping effect at short ranges necessary for a military pistol or revolver should have a caliber not less than 45 inch. They further noted a critical ballistic truth. Below this threshold, no amount of velocity increase within handgun parameters could compensate for insufficient bullet mass. This wasn't merely a preference. It was a scientific declaration of war against inadequate stopping power. Enter John Moses Browning, a titan of firearms innovation, already collaborating with Colt on a .41 caliber semi-automatic pistol. With the Army's new, non-negotiable .45 caliber requirement, Browning rapidly scaled his existing design, a testament to his engineering genius. This rapid adaptation led to the creation of the Model 1905, the precursor to the M1911. The cartridge itself, the 45 ACP automatic Colt pistol, underwent several crucial iterations, a collaborative effort between Colt, Winchester Repeating Arms, Frankfurt Arsenal, and Union Metallic Cartridge Company. The initial loading, a 200-grain bullet traveling at 900 feet per second, evolved into the standardized military load. A 230-grain full metal jacket bullet, launched at 830 feet per second from a 5-inch barrel. This slightly slower, heavier projectile was a deliberate choice, prioritizing maximum kinetic energy transfer and reliable performance over raw velocity. The genius of Browning's M1911 design lay in its remarkable simplicity and uncompromising robustness. It utilized a short recoil operation, a system where the barrel and slide recoil together for a short distance before the barrel disengages and drops, allowing the slide to continue its rearward motion. This was achieved via a swinging link that lowered the barrel out of engagement with the slide during cycling. The single-action trigger provided a consistent, crisp pull, crucial for accuracy under stress. Safety was paramount, and Browning incorporated two mechanisms: a grip safety that had to be depressed firmly to allow firing, and a manual thumb safety. This combination prevented accidental discharge while still permitting rapid deployment when needed. The 7-round detachable magazine could be changed quickly, and in a stroke of combat foresight, the pistol would fire the chambered round even without a magazine inserted, a crucial feature if a magazine was damaged, lost, or simply discarded in the heat of battle. The M1911 underwent extensive and brutal testing from 1906 to 1911, competing against formidable designs from Savage, Luger, and others. The torture tests were legendary, designed to push the weapon to its absolute breaking point. It was required to fire 6,000 rounds as rapidly as possible, a feat accomplished in just 27 minutes. The heated pistol was then repeatedly dunked in water, mud, and sand between strings of fire. Through it all, the Browning Colt design functioned flawlessly, a testament to its engineering integrity. On March 29, 1911, the U.S. Army formally adopted it as the Automatic Pistol Caliber 45, model of 1911. World War I combat experience, particularly the brutal trench warfare, revealed areas for refinement. These improvements were incorporated into the M1911A1, standardized in 1924, and reflected the American military's systematic approach to incorporating combat lessons into equipment development. The changes, while seemingly minor, were critical for soldier ergonomics and combat efficiency. A shorter trigger to accommodate smaller hands, scalloped cuts in the frame behind the trigger for a better reach, an arched mainspring housing for improved natural pointing, a longer grip safety spur to prevent painful hammer bite, wider sights for faster acquisition, and a shortened hammer spur to reduce snagging on equipment. These weren't cosmetic alterations. They were direct responses to the realities of sustained combat. The 45 ACP cartridge itself was a marvel of optimized ballistic performance within practical constraints. Operating at a relatively low 21,000 psi chamber pressure compared to 35,000 psi for 9mm parabellum, the round prioritized reliability and barrel longevity. The 230-grain projectile, with its 451-inch diameter, created a wound channel significantly larger than its caliber due to profound tissue displacement. At 830 feet per second, the bullet traveled just below the speed of sound, avoiding the instability and unpredictable behavior that can occur during transonic flight. This heavy bullet retained its energy exceptionally well, maintaining lethal force even at extended handgun ranges of 50 yards, a critical attribute in fluid combat situations. It was a round designed not just to wound, but to stop. When America plunged into World War II, M1911A1 production transformed from a peacetime trickle to a veritable wartime flood, showcasing American industrial might at its absolute apex. Colt's Manufacturing Company, the original patent holder and repository of expertise, immediately ramped up production at their Hartford, Connecticut facility. But even Colt's maximum capacity, roughly 800 pistols per day by 1943, was insufficient to meet the staggering demands of a global war. The Ordnance Department, under Brigadier General Gladian Barnes, orchestrated one of the most successful distributed manufacturing programs of the war. This wasn't simply about awarding contracts. It was about leveraging the vast, adaptable infrastructure of American industry. Unlike the often artisanal approach required for complex, precision-machined weapons, the M1911A1's robust design allowed for the application of true mass production techniques. Contracts were extended to companies with little to no prior firearms experience but with strong, proven manufacturing capabilities. Remington Rand, a company synonymous with typewriters, received its first contract in March 1942. Their Syracuse, New York plant, rapidly retooled from producing typing machines and adding devices, ultimately manufactured an astonishing 877 751 M1911A1 pistols, more than any other contractor, including Colt itself. Their production methodology revolutionized pistol manufacturing. They pioneered extensive use of stamping instead of more time-consuming forging processes, introduced automated checkering of grip frames, and employed statistical quality control that not only maintained precise tolerances but dramatically accelerated production. This represented a paradigm shift, proving that with intelligent engineering, quality and quantity could coexist. Ithaca Gun Company of New York, traditionally a shotgun manufacturer, produced another 369,129 pistols. Their innovative use of investment casting for small parts drastically reduced machining time by 60%, a remarkable efficiency gain during wartime. Union Switch and Signal Company of Swissvale, Pennsylvania, primarily a railroad equipment manufacturer, produced 55,000 pistols of exceptional quality, incorporating improved heat treatment processes that extended barrel life by an impressive 30%. Even Singer Manufacturing Company, known globally for its sewing machines, made a contribution, though numerically small, at 500 pistols. These educational guns were of such extraordinary quality that they remain the most sought-after M1911A1 variants among collectors. Crucially, Singer developed tooling and processes that were later transferred to other manufacturers, multiplying their impact far beyond their direct production numbers. A cornerstone of this industrial success was absolute parts standardization. Any component from any manufacturer would function perfectly in any M1911A1 frame. Tolerances were deliberately loose, typically 0.3 to 0.5 inches in most critical dimensions, ensuring function despite manufacturing variations, field contamination, or extreme thermal expansion. This interchangeability proved crucial on the battlefield, where depot-level maintenance often involved assembling functional pistols from components salvaged from multiple damaged weapons. The ammunition supply chain mirrored this incredible weapon production. Frankfurt Arsenal, the Army's primary ammunition facility, produced over 1 billion rounds of .45 ACP during the war, with Western Cartridge Company, Remington Arms, and Winchester Repeating Arms adding another 2 billion rounds. Quality control was stringent. Every lot underwent accuracy testing, pressure testing, and function testing in multiple weapons. Specifications remained consistent throughout production. A 230-grain bullet, 5.0 grains of powder, either bullseye or a similar burning rate, producing 830 feet per second velocity, plus or minus 25 feet per second. American innovation even extended to special ammunition variants. The M12 shot cartridge, developed for aircrew survival kits, contained 118 pieces of 7.12 birdshot in a paper capsule, effective against small game to 10 feet. An improved M15 shot cartridge used a blue wax capsule for better moisture resistance. Tracer rounds allowed shooters to visually track bullet paths in training, and proof loads, marked with Stanix-stained cases, tested plus P pressure resistance during manufacturing. This comprehensive approach ensured that every pistol had a limitless supply of reliable, high-quality ammunition. The Marine Corps' table of organization evolved dramatically, reflecting the hard-won combat lessons about the pistol's vital importance. In 1942, a Marine division was authorized a mere 798 pistols, primarily for officers, NCOs, and crew-served weapon teams. By December 1943, in the immediate aftermath of the horrific lessons of Tarawa, this authorization soared to 1,377. By 1945, the authorization reached 1,777 pistols per division. The 1st Marine Division on Okinawa, fighting in the war's final, brutal months, actually carried over 2,000 M1911A1s, with many riflemen acquiring pistols through unofficial but utterly practical channels. Distribution prioritized combat units. The 2nd Marine Division at Tarawa carried 456 M1911A1 pistols for approximately 18,000 Marines, roughly one pistol for every 12 men. By Iwo Jima, the 5th Marine Division carried 189 pistols for a similar strength, 1 per 10 men. Army units showed similar patterns. The 77th Infantry Division on Okinawa carried 1,034 M1911A1s among 16,000 soldiers. The pistol had evolved from a secondary weapon to a crucial, ubiquitous tool of survival in the brutal close quarters of Pacific combat. In stark contrast, the Type 14 Nambu represented Imperial Japan's attempt to create a modern military sidearm. But its development history and design revealed fundamental limitations that would ultimately doom it in combat. Colonel Kijiro Nambu, often referred to as the John Browning of Japan, designed his first semi-automatic pistol in 1902. This early Type A Grandpa Nambu superficially resembled the German Luger with its exposed barrel and distinctive knurled cocking knob, but it operated on entirely different internal principles. The Type 14, adopted in Taisho 14, 1926 in the Western calendar, evolved from these earlier Nambu designs, incorporating what were intended to be improvements based on early Japanese military experiences in China. The pistol utilized a locked breech mechanism with a floating locking block, a conceptually sound design, but one that demanded exceptionally precise manufacturing tolerances, which Japan's industrial base often struggled to consistently achieve, especially under wartime pressures. The 8-22mm Nambu cartridge, unique to Japanese weapons, fired a lightweight 102-grain bullet at approximately 1,065 feet per second from the Type 14's 4.6-inch barrel. On paper, certain specifications of the Nambu might have appeared superficially superior to the M1911A1. It held 8 rounds versus the M1911A1's 7. Its muzzle velocity exceeded the 45 ACP by over 200 feet per second, and at 2.03 pounds unloaded, it was nearly half a pound lighter than the M1911A1. Initial production models from Nagoya Arsenal and Kokura Arsenal did, in fact, exhibit excellent craftsmanship with deep bluing and careful hand-fitting of parts. However, these surface advantages masked fundamental, often fatal, flaws. The 8.8 22mm Nambu cartridge, despite its higher velocity, generated a mere 256 foot-pounds of muzzle energy, a staggering 31% deficit compared to the 45 ACP's 369 foot-pounds. This lightweight 102-grain bullet shed velocity rapidly, retaining only 180 foot-pounds at 50 yards versus the 45 ACP's robust 300 foot-pounds. The bottlenecked case design, while theoretically aiding feeding, frequently created severe extraction problems when chambers fouled with carbon or corrosion, a common occurrence in tropical combat. Japanese military procurement doctrine compounded these complications. Unlike American forces who were issued their weapons, Japanese officers were required to purchase their sidearms from their own salaries. A Type 14 cost 78 yen in 1940, roughly half a lieutenant's monthly pay. This economic barrier meant many officers received minimal training, often viewing the pistol more as a status symbol than a vital combat tool. Some officers, particularly those from wealthier families, opted to purchase foreign pistols instead, with Spanish ruby pistols in 32 ACP, or inherited European revolvers being common choices. This fragmented approach undermined standardization and training consistency. The Type 14's design philosophy also tragically reflected a Japanese tactical doctrine that prioritized spiritual power, Yamato Damashi, over material firepower. The Imperial Japanese Army's infantry manual, for instance, devoted more pages to sword technique than to pistol marksmanship. Pistols were largely considered secondary weapons, designated for tasks such as executing prisoners, controlling subordinates, performing ritual suicide in the face of capture, and as symbols of rank, not as primary combat tools for engaging an enemy. This doctrinal blindness prevented a critical recognition of design flaws that would prove utterly fatal in the crucible of real combat. As the war dragged on, manufacturing quality deteriorated catastrophically. Pre-war Type 14s featured 17 distinct inspection stamps, careful polishing, and hand-fitted parts, reflecting a meticulous, almost artisanal approach. By 1943, inspection marks were reduced to 3. Surface finishing was entirely eliminated, and parts interchangeability degraded severely. Late war production from the Torayamatsu factory exhibited crude tool marks, rough casting, and dimensional variations that would have failed any pre-war inspection standard. This decline wasn't just aesthetic. It fundamentally compromised the weapon's reliability and function. The Type 14's most critical design failures centered on its controls and magazine system. The safety lever, positioned on the left side above the trigger guard, required the shooting hand to shift its grip or the support hand to operate it. This seemingly minor ergonomic flaw became a fatal liability in combat, impossible to manipulate when wounded, carrying equipment, or grappling with an enemy. The magazine release, a spring-loaded lever at the bottom front of the grip, often released inadvertently during handling, leaving the pistol unable to fire due to its magazine disconnect safety. A 1939 modification added a magazine retention spring, intended to prevent the loss of magazines. However, this improvement made combat reloading nearly impossible. Magazines had to be yanked out against significant spring pressure, often requiring both hands, a luxury rarely afforded in a firefight. In tropical conditions, corrosion frequently welded magazines in place. Marines reported capturing Type 14s with magazines frozen solid, hammered unsuccessfully in desperate attempts to reload. Production statistics starkly reveal Japan's industrial limitations. From 1926 to 1945, approximately 400,000 Type 14 pistols were manufactured across all arsenals and subcontractors. Monthly production peaked at a mere 3,500 units in 1944, a fraction of American output, and by this point, quality was abysmal. The Nambu Rifle Manufacturing Company, Tokyo Company, and Tokyo Gas and Electric subsidiaries produced pistols with such poor quality control that parts from different manufacturers, or even different production runs from the same factory, would not interchange. This made battlefield repairs and parts replacement a nightmare, often rendering weapons irreparable with a single broken component. The Type 14. Nambu's failures in combat were not isolated incidents, but systematic design flaws that reflected a fundamental misunderstanding of modern combat requirements. Each deficiency, perhaps tolerable in isolation, combined to create a weapon that failed catastrophically under the brutal and unforgiving conditions of Pacific combat. The safety mechanism, located awkwardly above the trigger guard on the left side, represented the most immediate tactical liability. Operating it required either shifting the firing grip, thereby losing sight picture and trigger finger position, or using the support hand. In the chaotic, milliseconds matter world of close combat, this two-handed operation proved fatal. Marines reported numerous instances of Japanese officers futilely attempting to disengage their safeties while being overrun, their last frantic movements betraying a weapon design ill-suited for the battlefield. In contrast, the M1911A1's ambidextrous safety, easily operable with the thumb of the firing hand while maintaining grip and trigger position, could be disengaged seamlessly even while drawing from the holster, offering instant readiness. The magazine disconnect safety, intended to prevent accidental discharge with the magazine removed, transformed into a critical vulnerability for the Nambu. When magazines were damaged, lost, or frozen in place by corrosion, the entire weapon became inoperable. Unlike the M1911A1, which would fire its chambered round without a magazine, the Type 14 absolutely required a functioning, properly seated magazine to operate. In the abrasive coral sand of Tarawa, or the volcanic ash of Iwo Jima, where magazines were easily damaged or fouled. This feature rendered countless Type 14s useless, turning them into expensive, useless pieces of metal. Furthermore, the Type 14 lacked a crucial feature, a slide hold-open device. When the last round was fired, only the magazine follower held the bolt open. Removing the magazine allowed the bolt to slam forward, giving no immediate indication that the weapon was empty. In the heat of combat, shooters discovered empty chambers only when their triggers clicked uselessly. The M1911A1's slide lock, activated by the magazine follower, held the slide open after the last round, providing instant visual and tactile indication of an empty weapon, crucially speeding up reloading times and maintaining situational awareness. Extraction failures consistently plagued the Type 14, particularly as ammunition quality deteriorated. The bottlenecked 8-axiom 22mm case, theoretically superior for feeding, created a smaller bearing surface for the extractor. Combined with wartime ammunition, often using corrosive primers and inconsistent brass, cases frequently stuck in chambers or were ripped through by extractors, rendering the weapon useless until cleared. The straight-walled 45 ACP case, with its larger bearing surface and lower pressure, extracted reliably even from heavily fouled chambers, a testament to its pragmatic design. The Nambu's recoil spring assembly, a complex dual spring system, demanded precise manufacturing and meticulous maintenance. When these springs lost tension, a process accelerated by tropical heat and humidity, cycling became erratic, and failures to return to battery were common, often requiring manual slide manipulation in the middle of a firefight. The M1911A1's single recoil spring, even when weakened, usually maintained sufficient function for combat effectiveness, emphasizing the beauty of simplicity in design. Tropical conditions revealed additional devastating vulnerabilities in the Nambu. Its tight manufacturing tolerances, acceptable in Japan's temperate climate, became liabilities in the sweltering, humid Pacific. Thermal expansion from the 115 Goiter Fahrenheit temperatures recorded on Palayu caused actions to bind, grinding the mechanism to a halt. Monsoon humidity on Guadalcanal created rust that froze mechanisms solid within days. The M1911A1's deliberately loose tolerances, sometimes derided by target shooters as sloppy, were a stroke of genius, allowing function despite thermal expansion, heavy corrosion, or pervasive contamination. It was designed to work in the worst conditions imaginable. Field maintenance presented insurmountable challenges for the Type 14. It required tools for disassembly, a luxury almost entirely unavailable in combat. Complete disassembly involved 34 separate operations and carried a high risk of losing small springs and pins in the mud or sand. In stark contrast, the M1911A1 could be field stripped without tools in seconds. Depress the recoil spring plug, rotate the bushing, remove the recoil spring and guide, push out the slide stop, and remove the slide and barrel. Reassembly was simply the reverse process. Marines could field strip, clean with whatever was available, including urine when water was scarce, and reassemble their M1911A1s blindfolded in under 30 seconds, a critical skill for survival. Ammunition quality further compounded mechanical failures. By 1944, Japanese industry struggled desperately to maintain consistent powder charges and primer compounds. Captured ammunition tested by American ordnance units showed velocity variations exceeding 200 feet per second within single lots. Squib loads left bullets lodged in barrels, and subsequent rounds would create catastrophic failures, destroying the weapon. Conversely, excessive pressure rounds from double charges cracked frames and bulged chambers. American 45 ACP ammunition, despite the immense pressures of wartime production, maintained remarkable consistency throughout the war, with velocity variations rarely exceeding 25 feet per second within lots. This consistency was a silent but profound contributor to American combat reliability. The true test of these weapons came in the desperate, brutal close-quarters fighting that characterized Pacific Island combat. On Guadalcanal, during the fierce battle for Henderson Field on October 24, 125, 1942, Sergeant John Basilone's actions demonstrated both the M1911A1's effectiveness and the seamless integration of American weapons systems. While Basilone is famously remembered for his heroic machine gun defense, Witnesses reported his extensive use of his M1911A1 when Japanese soldiers breached the perimeter. Private First Class Nash Phillips, wounded in the battle, later testified, "Barcelone had a machine gun on the go for 3 days and nights without sleep, rest, or food. He was in a good emplacement and causing the Japs lots of trouble, not only firing his machine gun but also using his pistol." When Japanese soldiers penetrated the line during vicious hand-to-hand fighting, Barcelone's M1911A1 proved decisive. Each 230-grain bullet, often modified by Marines cutting crosses in the tips of ball ammunition for greater expansion, delivered immediate stopping power. Phillips described seeing Japanese soldiers knocked backward off their feet by Barcelone's pistol fire, a testament to the 45's raw power. The Japanese assault on Henderson Field involved approximately 3,000 soldiers from the Sendai Division against fewer than 700 Marine defenders along Barcelone's sector, creating local numerical superiority of nearly 5.1. In such dire circumstances, the difference between the .45 ACP's immediate incapacitation and the 8mm Nambu's lesser stopping power was multiplied across hundreds of individual engagements. At Tarawa, Staff Sergeant William Bordelon's actions, though primarily involving demolition charges, included critical moments where small arms made the ultimate difference. Bordelon, an engineer with the 1st Battalion, 18th Marines, landed in the initial assault waves on November 20, 1943. His amphibious tractor took numerous hits, killing all but 4 of the Marines aboard. Bordelon's mission was to destroy Japanese pillboxes with demolition charges, but approaching these fortified positions often required intense suppressive fire. After successfully placing charges on 2 pillboxes, Bordelon was wounded by machine gun fire. With his demolition charges exhausted, Marine Combat Correspondent Staff Sergeant David Dempsey, who witnessed the action, reported that Bordelon grabbed a rifle and continued fighting, covering other Marines as they moved forward. While accounts often focus on his demolition work, the incredibly close-quarters nature of the fighting meant pistols were constantly employed. Bordelon's M1911A1, like those of all Marine engineers, served as his vital last line of defense, while placing charges directly against enemy positions. The Type 14's combat failures were equally well documented and harrowing. On Tarawa, Marine Private Robert Sherrod, a Time Life correspondent embedded with the 2nd Marine Division, witnessed a Japanese officer's desperate struggle with his Nambu. The officer was screaming at his men, trying to shoot his pistol. He kept pulling the trigger, but nothing happened. The gun was jammed. Sand, maybe, or a bad magazine. A Marine shot him with a .45 from maybe 20 feet. He flew backward like he'd been hit with a sledgehammer. Similar accounts proliferated across every island battlefield. On Saipan, June 15, 1944, during the massive Japanese Banzai Charge, the largest of the Pacific War, Marine Corporal John D'Alessandro of the 27th Marines described close combat in the pre-dawn darkness. "They came at us in waves, officers in front waving swords and pistols. I saw one officer trying to clear his jammed Nambu while running toward us. He was working the action frantically when I shot him with my .45. One shot center mass and he went down hard. The .45 would stop them cold. The impact was like hitting them with a baseball bat. The mathematical reality of stopping power became starkly apparent in after-action medical reports. Marine Corps medical personnel meticulously documented wound characteristics, consistently showing that .45 ACP hits to the torso created temporary wound cavities exceeding 4 inches in diameter, causing immediate blood pressure drops and nervous system disruption. An instant incapacitation. The 8mm Nambu, with its lighter, faster bullet, created wounds barely larger than its caliber, often requiring multiple hits for any degree of incapacitation, a lethal delay in a close fight. Lieutenant Colonel Louis Chesty Puller, commanding 1st Battalion, 7th Marines at Guadalcanal, noted in his after-action report, "The .45 automatic pistol proved invaluable in repelling Japanese infiltrators and banzai attacks. Multiple instances were observed where single rounds from the Yao .45 immediately stopped attacking Japanese soldiers, while enemy officers armed with their issued pistols failed to inflict casualties even at close range." The disparity between the M1911A1 and Type 14 Nambu reflected fundamentally different military philosophies shaped by distinct cultural and historical experiences. American doctrine, forged in the crucible of frontier wars and colonial conflicts, prioritized raw firepower and individual marksmanship. The Thompson-Lagarde tests had provided American forces with scientific justification for maximum stopping power. The conclusion that nothing less than .45 caliber would suffice became an unshakable dogma, not a mere preference, but an evidence-based requirement. The tests measured not just lethality, but immediate incapacitation, the ability to stop an attacker before they could close distance or continue fighting. This temporal element was crucial in close combat. The difference between immediate and eventual incapacitation was measured in American lives. American training reflected this unwavering emphasis on practical effectiveness. At Paris Island and Camp Pendleton, Marines fired thousands of rounds in pistol training. The course began with bullseye marksmanship, instilling foundational skills like trigger control, sight picture, and breathing, then rapidly progressed to combat shooting. Marines learned to fire from retention positions with the pistol against their ribs, point shooting without using sights, and engaging multiple targets while moving. The standard qualification required 70% hits on man-sized targets at 25 yards, firing 50 rounds under intense time pressure, simulating the stress of combat. The M1911A1's manual of arms emphasized combat efficiency above all else. The Israeli draw technique, though not known by that name in 1943, was standard procedure. Drawing while simultaneously thumbing off the safety, the finger entering the trigger guard only when the muzzle cleared the holster and was oriented toward the target. Marines practiced malfunction clearances, tap, rack, bang, until they became automatic, ingrained reflexes. They learned to count shots, reloading before the slide locked back when possible, thus maintaining continuous fire capability. Japanese pistol training, however, remained minimal and largely ceremonial. The Imperial Japanese Army's training manual devoted a mere 2 pages to pistol marksmanship, compared to 12 pages for sword technique. Officers received perhaps 50 rounds of annual training ammunition, and only then if available. The emphasis was on precision shooting at stationary targets from formal stances, utterly divorced from combat effectiveness. Many officers arrived in combat having fired fewer rounds through their Type 14s in their entire careers than American Marines fired in a single training day. Japanese tactical doctrine viewed pistols primarily as symbols of authority rather than critical combat tools. Their primary purposes included maintaining discipline, executing deserters or cowards, honorable suicide when capture seemed imminent, and executing prisoners. The idea of using pistols as primary combat weapons in an assault seemed absurd, as the warrior's sword represented his very soul, a connection to the samurai tradition. This philosophical blindness prevented any recognition of the pistol's critical tactical importance in modern close combat, an oversight that would prove immensely costly. American doctrine, by contrast, evolved continuously, driven by invaluable combat feedback. After Guadalcanal, training emphasized shooting from prone and supine positions, common when wounded or seeking cover. After Tarawa, where Marines fought in waist-deep water, training was adapted to include waterborne operations, focusing on keeping weapons dry during landing, clearing water from barrels, and immediate action after immersion. Following reports of Japanese infiltrators breaching Marine foxholes at night, training incorporated weapon retention techniques and contact distance shooting. This iterative process of learning, adapting, and improving was a hallmark of the American military, ensuring that tactics and equipment were constantly refined to meet the brutal realities of the battlefield. The ammunition philosophy also differed radically. Americans designed the .45 ACP for one singular purpose: maximum stopping power within practical constraints. Velocity was deliberately kept subsonic to avoid the unpredictable instability of transonic flight. Bullet weight was maximized for momentum transfer. The round's somewhat rainbow trajectory at distance was deemed irrelevant because pistol fights occurred within 25 yards. Japanese 8mm Nambu development, conversely, prioritized velocity and trajectory, aiming for rifle-like performance from a pistol cartridge. This pursuit of inappropriate characteristics tragically sacrificed essential stopping power for negligible practical advantage, a classic case of misaligned priorities. Cultural factors profoundly influenced weapons employment. American individualism encouraged personal initiative and adaptation. Marines frequently modified their M1911A1s, filed sights for faster draw, stippled front straps for better grip, shortened triggers for smaller hands. Such modifications would have been unthinkable in the rigid, hierarchical Japanese military, where conformity was absolute and individual initiative discouraged below senior ranks. The Japanese concept of bamboo spear spirit, the belief that spiritual power could overcome material disadvantage, pervaded military thinking. When Chinese forces complained about the Type 14's inadequacy against Russian-supplied weapons, Japanese advisors notoriously responded that insufficient warrior spirit, not inferior weapons, caused their failures. This ingrained denial of material reality prevented systematic improvement of weapons systems, leading to a tragic cycle of inadequacy. American pragmatism, however, demanded measurable effectiveness. The Bureau of Ordnance conducted continuous testing of ammunition performance, accumulating vast data on velocity, pressure, accuracy, and terminal ballistics. Feedback from combat units directly drove modifications. Improved magazine springs after reports of feeding problems, harder extractors after extraction failures, and enhanced rust preventative finishes for tropical service. Each modification underwent rigorous testing before implementation, ensuring that improvements actually improved performance. A stark contrast to Japan's static and often complacent approach. The Pacific Theater provided the ultimate proving ground for weapon reliability, subjecting both American and Japanese pistols to environmental extremes that would have been impossible to replicate in peacetime testing. From the freezing Aleutians to the equatorial Solomons, from coral atolls barely above sea level to volcanic mountains, these environments tested every aspect of weapon design and manufacturing. Guadalcanal's climate was a true tropical hell. Rainfall exceeded 200 inches annually, with humidity constantly at 100%. Temperatures ranged from 75 degrees Celsius at night to 95 degrees Celsius daily, but felt like 115 degrees Celsius, according to marine accounts. Metal rusted overnight, leather rotted within weeks, and wooden stocks warped and split. In this environment, the M1911A1's parkerized finish, a phosphate coating that absorbed oil, proved vastly superior to bluing. Even when surface rust appeared, the pistol continued functioning. The Type 14's blued finish, beautiful when new, provided minimal corrosion protection. Surface rust appeared within days, progressing to deep pitting within weeks. Marine Armorer Sergeant Thomas Morrison, with the 1st Marine Division on Guadalcanal, documented the maintenance challenges in his journal. The 45s need daily cleaning, but keep working even when they look like hell. We're using motor oil, gun oil, even coconut oil. Anything to keep them running. The captured pistols rust solid in 3 days. Their springs break when you try to force them open. We've got a pile of them we can't even disassemble. Tarawa presented different, equally devastating challenges. Coral sand, finer than talcum powder, that infiltrated every mechanism. The island's lack of vegetation meant no shade from the equatorial sun, which heated metal to burning temperatures. Marines often wrapped pistol grips with cloth or tape to prevent severe burns. Water was critically scarce, perhaps 5 gallons per day for an entire battalion, making thorough weapon cleaning impossible. The M1911A1's loose tolerances allowed functioning despite sand infiltration. Marines learned to work the slide vigorously before use, allowing sand to fall through the deliberately generous gaps. The Type 14's tight tolerances meant that sand particles instantly locked mechanisms solid, rendering them useless. Peleliu, in September 1944, recorded some of the highest temperatures of the Pacific War. Official readings reached 115 degrees Celsius, but temperatures in fighting positions among the coral ridges often exceeded 120 degrees Celsius. Marines suffered more heat casualties than combat wounds on some days. Metal expanded significantly at these temperatures. The M1911A1, designed with sufficient thermal expansion tolerances, continued functioning. The Type 14, with its precise peacetime tolerances, experienced binding as parts expanded differentially, leading to stoppages. Marine Private Eugene Sledge, with K Company, 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines on Peleliu, vividly wrote, "Everything metal was too hot to touch. We wrapped our rifle slings around our hands to carry them. Canteens burned our lips. My .45 was so hot, the rounds in the magazine were warm to the touch when I unloaded it. But it worked. Always worked." Iwo Jima's volcanic ash presented unique challenges. The fine black sand, actually pulverized volcanic glass, was highly abrasive. It infiltrated even seemingly sealed mechanisms, accelerating wear exponentially. The island's sulfur springs created a corrosive vapor that etched metal surfaces. After 5 weeks of combat, many rifles and machine guns required replacement due to bore erosion. M1911A1 pistols, with their simple mechanisms and robust construction, maintained function despite accelerated wear. Type 14s, however, suffered catastrophic extraction failures as chambers eroded and cases stuck. The Aleutian campaign, at the opposite extreme, showcased the M1911A1's versatility in freezing conditions. During the May 1943 WW2 invasion, temperatures dropped below freezing, accompanied by 100 mph winds. Lubricants congealed to a tar-like consistency, and breath condensation froze on metal, creating ice that locked actions. The M1911A1 functioned without lubrication. Soldiers learned to clean all oil from the weapons, running them dry. The Type 14's complex dual recoil spring system, however, required lubrication to function, making it inoperable in extreme cold. Saltwater immersion during amphibious operations challenged both designs. At Tarawa, Marines waded 500 yards through chest-deep water under continuous fire. Weapons were completely submerged for 10 to 15 minutes. The M1911A1, designed with drainage channels and minimal enclosed spaces, could be shaken out and would function immediately. The Type 14, with its enclosed trigger mechanism and complex internals, retained water that had to be disassembled to drain, an impossible feat under enemy fire. Monsoon conditions on New Guinea and the Philippines tested waterproofing to its limits. Rain fell continuously for weeks, making it impossible to keep weapons dry. Everything organic rotted: leather holsters, cloth, wooden grips. The M1911A1's plastic grips, introduced in 1943, were impervious to moisture. Steel parts required constant oiling but maintained function. The Type 14's wooden grips, especially on late war models, absorbed moisture, swelling until they cracked frames. The magazine retention spring, added in 1939, frequently rusted in place, making magazine changes utterly impossible. Maintenance supplies further reflected these divergent philosophies. American forces received abundant cleaning materials: bore brushes, cleaning rods, patches, CLP, cleaner, lubricant, preservative, and specialized lubricants for extreme conditions. Every Marine carried a pistol cleaning kit. Japanese forces by 1944 often lacked basic cleaning supplies. Captured Japanese documents indicated units sharing single cleaning rods, using palm fronds as patches, and motor oil when gun oil was unavailable. Field modifications demonstrated American adaptability. Marines learned to polish feed ramps with emery cloth to improve feeding, relieve slide-to-frame fit with valve grinding compound to improve reliability, and replace recoil springs with springs from damaged weapons to maintain proper tension. Such improvisational modifications, often performed at the battalion level, kept weapons functional despite extreme wear. Japanese forces, lacking spare parts and modification capability, simply discarded malfunctioning Type 14s. The Battle of Okinawa, commencing April 1, 1945, represented the ultimate test of American and Japanese small arms in the Pacific War's largest amphibious operation. Codenamed Operation Iceberg, the invasion pitted 183,000 American soldiers and Marines against 110,000 Japanese defenders on an island destined to serve as the staging area for the planned invasion of Japan. The 82-day battle, one of the most savage in history, would demonstrate with finality the overwhelming superiority of American weapons. Okinawa's terrain differed radically from previous Pacific battlefields. The island stretched 60 miles long and varied from 2 to 18 miles wide, featuring open farmland in the north and rugged ridges honeycombed with caves in the south. Japanese General Mitsuru Ushijima had months to prepare defenses, creating an elaborate system of interconnected caves, tunnels, and fortified positions designed to channel American forces into brutal killing zones. This battlefield would demand unrelenting close-quarters combat, where pistols often determined individual survival. The American force included the entire 10th Army under Lieutenant General Simon Bolivar Buckner, Jr., comprising the Army's 24th Corps, 7th, 27th, 77th, and 96th Infantry Divisions, and the Marines' 3rd Amphibious Corps, 1st and 6th Marine Divisions. These units carried over 15,000 M1911A1 pistols, nearly one for every 12 combat troops. Ammunition supplies included 10 million rounds of .45 ACP, reflecting the hard-learned lessons about ammunition consumption in prolonged operations. The Japanese 32nd Army, reinforced by naval troops and Okinawan conscripts, represented Japan's last cohesive military force outside the home islands. Their officers carried Type 14 Nambus, but ammunition shortages were critical. Documents captured from the Japanese 62nd Division indicated an allocation of only 20 rounds per pistol for the entire campaign. By stark contrast, American forces carried 21 rounds per pistol as their basic load, with unlimited resupply readily available. The initial landings on April 1, 1945, Easter Sunday, and April Fool's Day met surprisingly light resistance as Ushijima had cannily withdrawn his forces to prepared positions in the south. However, when American forces encountered the Japanese main defensive lines at Kakuzu Ridge on April 9th, the battle's true character emerged. The fighting immediately devolved into savage close-quarters combat, where distances were measured in feet, and survival often depended on who could bring effective firepower to bear fastest. Technical Sergeant Beaufort Anderson of the 96th Infantry Division earned the Medal of Honor on April 13th during the assault on Kakuzu Ridge. When his unit was pinned down, Anderson single-handedly attacked Japanese positions with grenades and small arms. His citation notes he eliminated 25 Japanese soldiers in close combat. Witnesses reported Anderson extensively used his M1911A1 when Japanese soldiers emerged from spider holes at point-blank range. "The 45 saved my life a dozen times that day," Anderson later stated. "When they popped up from holes right under you, there was no time to swing a rifle around. The 45 knocked them down instantly. The Japanese conducted massive counterattacks throughout the battle, culminating in Operation Kikusui on May 4th, when Ushijima launched his entire reserve in a desperate offensive. During this attack, close combat became general across the entire front. Marine Private First Class Harold Agerholm of the 4th Battalion, 10th Marines, would receive a posthumous Medal of Honor for evacuating 45 wounded Marines under continuous fire. Witnesses reported Agerholm carried his M1911A1 in one hand while dragging wounded with the other, firing at Japanese infiltrators who approached his casualties. Cave warfare on Okinawa created unique combat conditions that maximized the importance of pistols. The Japanese had transformed natural caves into elaborate defensive complexes with multiple levels, interconnecting tunnels, and concealed firing ports. Attacking these positions required Marines and soldiers to enter confined spaces where rifles were unwieldy. The M1911A1 became the primary weapon for cave clearing. Marine Corporal Donald Hess of the 1st Marine Division described these operations. "You'd throw in white phosphorus grenades to burn out the oxygen, then go in with pistols and flashlights. The 45 was perfect for this work. In those confined spaces, the concussion from the 45 was stunning. We'd put tactical lights, flashlights taped to the barrel on our pistols. You'd see movement, point, and shoot. The 45 would blow Japanese soldiers backward into the cave walls. The technical superiority of the 45 ACP in confined spaces became mathematically quantifiable. In caves and tunnels, the 45's subsonic velocity meant less disorienting muzzle blast for the shooter while delivering maximum energy to targets. The heavy bullet's momentum carried through web gear and equipment that might deflect lighter, faster projectiles. Terminal ballistic studies conducted post-war showed the 45 ACP created larger temporary wound cavities in gelatin than any other military pistol cartridge. Crucial when targets had to be immediately incapacitated in confined spaces where wounded enemies could detonate grenades. Sugarloaf Hill, a small mound that anchored the Japanese Shuri line, became the site of the most intense close combat from May 12th to 18th. The 6th Marine Division suffered over 2,000 casualties taking this single position. Marines attacked 17 times before finally securing the hill. During these assaults, combat often occurred at handshaking distance. Marine Sergeant James Stevens recalled, "We were fighting in the rain, in mud up to our knees. Japanese soldiers would emerge from hidden positions right among us. Your rifle would be clogged with mud, but the 45 always worked. I saw Marines and Japanese soldiers shooting at each other from 5 feet apart. The Marine with the 45 always won those encounters." By late May, the failure of Japanese small arms became critical. The 32nd Army's operations officer, Colonel Hiromichi Yahara, wrote in his post-war memoir, "Our Type 14 pistols had become almost useless. Ammunition was nearly exhausted, and those weapons still functioning often failed due to rain and mud." American soldiers seemed to have unlimited ammunition for their powerful pistols, which could kill a man instantly, even with peripheral hits. The monsoon season, beginning in mid-May, turned Okinawa into a mudscape. Foxholes filled with water, weapons submerged repeatedly. The M1911A1's drainage channels and loose tolerances allowed it to function despite mud immersion. Marines learned to keep pistols inside their shirts when not in use, using body heat to prevent rust. The Type 14, with its enclosed design and tight tolerances, became hopelessly clogged with mud, often freezing solid. Ammunition quality disparities became extreme by Okinawa. American 45 ACP ammunition maintained consistent performance throughout the campaign. Lot testing showed velocity variations of less than 30 feet per second and no misfires in 100,000 rounds tested. Japanese 8mm Nambu ammunition, produced in 1945 under the duress of bombing and material shortages, showed catastrophic quality control failures. Captured ammunition tested by American ordnance units revealed 30% misfires due to faulty primers. Velocity variations exceeding 300 feet per second within single lots, casehead separations from brittle brass, and squib loads that lodged bullets in barrels, turning the weapon into a bomb. The Japanese conducted their final organized resistance in the Kian Peninsula at Okinawa's southern tip in mid-June. Here, in the maze of coral caves and ridges, combat reached its most primitive level. American forces used flamethrowers, demolition charges, and small arms to systematically eliminate Japanese positions. The 96th Infantry Division reported expending 450,000 rounds of .45 ACP ammunition during June alone, more than many divisions used in entire European campaigns. Private First Class Desmond Doss, the conscientious objector medic who refused to carry weapons, provided unique testimony about pistol effectiveness. Serving with the 77th Infantry Division, Doss witnessed countless close combat engagements while treating the wounded. In his post-war interviews, he stated, "The difference between our 45s and their pistols was like night and day. I saw Japanese officers empty their pistols into our boys who kept fighting. But when our boys hit a Japanese soldier with a 45, he went down and stayed down. That pistol saved many American lives." The battle statistics tell a chilling story of American material superiority. American forces suffered 12,520 killed and 36,731 wounded. Japanese losses included approximately 110,000 military deaths, plus 100,000 Okinawan civilians. The staggering 10.1 kill ratio in America's favor reflected superior firepower at every level, from naval guns to individual pistols. In close combat, where individual weapons often determined survival, the M1911A1's superiority multiplied American effectiveness geometrically. The final accounting of M1911A1 versus Type 14 production reveals more than just numbers. It exposes the fatal delusion of Imperial Japan attempting to fight an industrial war with artisanal production methods. By war's end, American factories had produced an astounding 1,858 742 A1 pistols between 1941 and 1945. Japan managed approximately 400,000 Type 14 pistols over nearly 2 decades, from 1926 to 1945. This 7.1 production ratio during just the war years drastically understates the true disparity when considering quality, standardization, and ammunition supply. American production methodology revolutionized manufacturing. Remington Rand's Syracuse plant, converting from typewriter production, achieved remarkable efficiency through aggressive innovation. They introduced broach rifling, cutting perfect barrels in single passes rather than the traditional cut rifling that required multiple, slower passes. Statistical process control, developed by Walter Schuhart and implemented by Western Electric engineers, maintained incredibly tight tolerances while simultaneously increasing production speed. By 1943, Remington Rand produced 1,000 pistols daily with fewer than a 1% rejection rate. The learning curve demonstrated unparalleled American industrial adaptability. Colt, with decades of experience, required 1.2 man-hours to produce one M19A1 frame in 1942. Remington Rand, starting from zero firearms experience, achieved 0.88 man-hours per frame by 1943 through superior industrial engineering. Ithaca Gun Company introduced fixture designs that reduced machining setups by 60%. Innovations later adopted across all manufacturers. Parts interchangeability was absolute. In November 1943, Army Ordnance conducted a famous demonstration at Aberdeen Proving Ground. Armorers disassembled 100 M1911A1 pistols from different manufacturers, mixed all parts randomly, and then reassembled them blindfolded. All 100 pistols functioned perfectly. This interchangeability proved crucial when depot-level maintenance often involved assembling functional weapons from damaged ones. Japanese Type 14 parts, even from the same manufacturer, frequently required hand-fitting, turning simple repairs into complex, time-consuming operations. The economic efficiency was staggering. In 1942, the unit cost of an M1911A1 was $31.42. By 1945, improved production methods reduced this to a mere $15, less than half the original cost despite wartime inflation. The Japanese Type 14 requiring extensive hand-fitting and artisanal production, cost 78 yen throughout the war, equivalent to about 31 Northern Tulu in 1941, but representing a far greater portion of Japan's limited industrial capacity. Ammunition production dwarfed weapon manufacturing. American factories produced approximately 3.5 billion rounds of 45 ACP during World War II. This equated to 162 rounds for every M1911A1 manufactured, sufficient for extensive training and sustained combat consumption. Japanese 8mm Nambu production totaled approximately 100 million rounds from 1926 to 1945, or a paltry 250 rounds per pistol over 2 decades. By 1945, Japanese forces allocated a critical 20 rounds per pistol for entire campaigns. Quality control revealed profound philosophical differences. Every American M1911A1 underwent proof testing with high-pressure cartridges, generating 30% over standard pressure. Barrels were air-gauged to ensure dimensional consistency. Function testing required 100 rounds without malfunction. Random samples underwent 5,000-round endurance tests. Metallurgical analysis ensured proper heat treatment and material composition. Japanese quality control, minimal before the war, essentially disappeared by 1944. Late war Type 14s showed crude tool marks, significant dimensional variations, and soft metal that would have failed any industrial inspection standard. The supply chain comparison was equally telling. American manufacturers received specialized steel alloys, SAE 4140 for barrels, 80, 6, and 20 for frames, produced to exacting specifications. Carbide cutting tools, themselves products of American industrial superiority, maintained precise dimensions through thousands of parts. Japanese manufacturers by 1944 often used whatever steel was available. Captured Type 14s showed frames made from recycled ship armor, barrels from artillery brass, and springs from salvaged automotive parts. A desperate improvisation that doomed reliability. Subcontractor networks multiplied American advantages. Grip manufacturers like Colt Plastics Company, Franzite Company, and Keys Fiber Company produced millions of synthetic grips impervious to tropical conditions. Spring manufacturers such as Wolf Company and Associated Spring Corporation provided consistent springs heat-treated for specific tension requirements. Magazine contractors like Scoville Manufacturing and Risden Manufacturing produced magazines to tight tolerances, ensuring universal fit. Japanese production remained largely vertically integrated within arsenals, limiting overall production capacity and preventing the specialization benefits that drove American efficiency. Training ammunition allocation profoundly demonstrated different priorities. American forces allocated 240 rounds per man for basic pistol qualification and 500 rounds for advanced training. Combat units received 100 rounds monthly for sustainment training. Total training expenditure exceeded 500 million rounds. Japanese officers purchasing their own ammunition typically fired fewer than 100 rounds annually. Many arrived in combat having fired their Type 14 fewer times than American Marines fired in single training sessions. Replacement rates further revealed combat realities. American forces replaced approximately 15% of M1911A1 pistols annually due to combat loss, damage beyond repair, or excessive wear. The robust industrial base easily supported this attrition while simultaneously increasing total inventory. Japanese forces could not replace losses. Units that lost pistols to combat damage simply went without. By Okinawa, many Japanese officers carried swords exclusively, their pistols long since having failed. The Pacific War's final accounting revealed profound truths that transcended mere technical specifications or production statistics. In the crucible of history's largest naval war, fought across millions of square miles of ocean and thousands of islands, the undisputed superiority of the M1911A1 over the Type 14 Nambu represented American industrial democracy's triumph over Japanese military feudalism. The mathematics of terminal ballistics were inexorable. The 45 ACP's 230-grain bullet at 830 feet per second delivered 370 foot-pounds of kinetic energy, creating temporary wound cavities exceeding 4 inches in diameter in ballistic gelatin. The Aitman Nambu's 102-grain bullet at 6 feet per second generated a mere 256 foot-pounds, creating wound channels barely larger than its caliber. This 44% energy advantage translated directly to stopping power, the ability to immediately incapacitate an enemy before they could continue attacking. But energy alone didn't tell the complete story. The 45 ACP's heavy bullet retained velocity better, maintaining 89% of its muzzle energy at 50 yards versus 76% for the 8mm Nambu. The larger frontal area, .451 inches versus 320 inches, created 98% greater tissue displacement. The subsonic velocity eliminated ballistic crack, reducing shooter disorientation in confined spaces, a crucial factor in cave and jungle fighting. The straight-walled case extracted reliably from fouled chambers, a testament to its practical engineering. Every technical parameter favored the American cartridge. The weapons themselves reflected their cartridges' characteristics. The M1911A1's robust construction, weighing 39 ounces, absorbed recoil while providing a steady shooting platform. The single-action trigger, breaking at 4 to 5 pounds, enabled precise shot placement under stress. The grip safety and manual safety prevented accidental discharge while allowing instant readiness. The 7-round magazine, while holding one less round than the Type 14, could be changed in seconds, and, crucially, the pistol would still fire its chambered round without a magazine present. The Type 14's attempted advantages proved illusory. Its lighter weight, 32 ounces, made recoil harder to control despite the weaker cartridge. The heavy, gritty trigger pull severely degraded accuracy. The safety location required two-handed operation, a fatal flaw. The magazine retention spring made reloading nearly impossible under stress. The magazine disconnect safety transformed magazine damage into complete weapon failure. Every supposed improvement degraded combat effectiveness. Combat validation was overwhelming. At Guadalcanal, Tarawa, Saipan, Peleliu, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa, the M1911A1 proved itself in thousands of close-quarters engagements. Marines and soldiers trusted their lives to the pistol, knowing it would function despite mud, sand, water, or neglect. The psychological impact multiplied its effectiveness. Japanese soldiers learned to fear the distinctive, heavy boom of the 45, knowing it often meant immediate death or a crippling blow. Post-war analysis by the United States Strategic Bombing Survey included extensive interviews with surviving Japanese officers. Colonel Susumu Nishiura, staff officer with the 32nd Army on Okinawa, stated, "Your .45 caliber automatic pistol was greatly feared. It would knock a man down with hits to extremities. Our pistols required multiple center hits to stop an American soldier. This disparity in effectiveness was demoralizing to our forces." Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kuribayashi, commanding Japanese forces on Iwo Jima, wrote in his final report before his death, "American material superiority is overwhelming. Their individual weapons, particularly their powerful pistols, give them great advantage in close combat where spiritual power cannot overcome mechanical superiority." This admission, from an officer who had spent years in America as a military attaché, revealed a stark Japanese recognition of their material inadequacy. The industrial disparity was insurmountable. American factories produced more M1911A1 pistols in 1943 alone, over $600,000, than Japan manufactured Type 14s in 2 decades. American quality improved throughout production, while Japanese quality collapsed. American ammunition supply was unlimited, while Japanese forces hoarded every precious cartridge. American training was extensive, while Japanese training was minimal. Every measurable parameter favored American forces by factors of 3-to-1 to 10-to-1. The human cost crystallized these advantages. Throughout the Pacific War, Marine and Army units armed with M1911A1 pistols consistently achieved kill ratios exceeding 10.1 in close combat. On Iwo Jima, 6,121 Americans died versus 21,000 Japanese, a 3.1 ratio despite attacking heavily fortified positions. On Okinawa, 12,520 Americans died versus 110,000 Japanese, an 8.8.1 ratio. While many factors contributed to these disparities, the overwhelming effectiveness of individual weapons in close combat played a crucial, often decisive, role. Veterans' testimonies provided the final, poignant verdict. Marine Gunnery Sergeant John Basilone, before his death on Iwo Jima, is quoted as saying, "The .45 automatic is the finest military pistol ever made. It hits like a sledgehammer and never fails. One shot ends any argument." Technical Sergeant Charles Lindbergh of the 3rd Marine Division stated, "That pistol saved more Marine lives than any other weapon. When Japanese soldiers got inside our lines at night, the .45 was what stopped them." Japanese veterans who survived American .45 ACP hits bore distinctive scars. Dr. Teru Ueno, treating veterans at Tokyo Veterans Hospital post-war, noted, "Wounds from the American .45 caliber pistol were immediately recognizable decades later. The massive tissue damage created distinctive scarring patterns. Veterans shot with this weapon considered themselves fortunate to have survived." The M1911A1's legacy extended far beyond World War II. Special Operations Forces carried it through Korea, Vietnam, and into the 21st century. The Type 14, however, vanished immediately after the Japanese surrender, replaced by American weapons. Modern Japanese self-defense forces have never attempted to design indigenous pistols, a tacit recognition of the futility of competing with Western arms development. The broader implications transcended mere weapons. The M1911A1 represented American industrial democracy, standardized, mass-produced, effective, and available to every soldier regardless of rank or wealth. The Type 14 represented Japanese military feudalism, handcrafted, inconsistent, inadequate, and restricted to officers who could afford its purchase. These weapons embodied their society's vastly different approaches to warfare. In the final analysis, the Pacific War validated the Thompson-Lagarde test's conclusion from 1904. In close combat, stopping power determines survival. The M1911A1 delivered that stopping power reliably, consistently, and under any condition, millions of times over. The Type 14, Nambu, failed to deliver adequate performance even under ideal conditions. This disparity, multiplied across millions of individual combats, contributed significantly to the American victory. The mathematics of death in the Pacific War were precise and unforgiving. when Staff Sergeant William Bordelon charged Japanese pillboxes on Tarawa, when Sergeant John Basilone held Henderson Field on Guadalcanal, when thousands of unnamed Marines and soldiers fought in nameless caves on forgotten islands, they carried a weapon that would not fail them. The M1911A1 automatic pistol firing the .45 ACP cartridge. Every trigger pull launched a 230-grain projectile at 830 feet per second, delivering 370 foot-pounds of kinetic energy, creating wound channels that immediately incapacitated enemy combatants. This simple equation, mass times velocity squared divided by 450/240, determined survival in countless close-quarters engagements. The Japanese Type 14 Nambu, firing its 102-grain bullet at 1,065 feet per second for a mere 256 foot-pounds of energy, consistently failed this mathematical test of combat effectiveness. The production statistics told an equally decisive story. American factories manufactured 1,978 742 M1911A1 pistols during World War II, supported by 3.5 billion rounds of ammunition. Japan produced approximately 400,000 Type 14 pistols over 2 decades, with perhaps 100 million rounds total. This 4.7.1 production advantage in pistols and 35.1 advantage in ammunition during just the war years represented an industrial supremacy that no amount of spiritual power could overcome. But beyond numbers lay a fundamental truth about modern warfare. Victory belongs to nations that combine industrial capacity with engineering excellence, that value individual soldiers' lives enough to equip them with the best possible weapons, that learn from combat experience and systematically improve their tools of war. The M1911A1 embodied these principles. The Type 14 Nambu represented their antithesis. In the end, the Pacific War's outcome was determined by many factors: grand strategy, meticulous logistics, groundbreaking code-breaking, overwhelming naval power, and, ultimately, atomic weapons. But in those desperate moments when combat reduced to its most primitive form, one man facing another at arm's length with death mere seconds away, the American Marine or soldier with an M1911A1 held an overwhelming, often unassailable advantage over his Japanese opponent with a Type 14 Nambu. The thunder of the .45 ACP echoed from Pearl Harbor to Tokyo Bay, each shot a small but decisive contribution to victory. The M1911A1 didn't win the Pacific War alone, but in the brutal arithmetic of close combat, it ensured that American forces held a crushing advantage that multiplied across thousands of engagements to help determine the war's outcome. In this mathematics of survival, where stopping power equaled victory and mechanical failure meant death, America's M1911A1 .45 caliber pistol stood supreme, and Japan's Type 14 Nambu was utterly, catastrophically, and fatally outgunned. The last word belongs to Fleet Admiral Chester Nimitz, who understood the profound importance of individual weapons in determining victory. Our technology, including the superiority of individual weapons like the M1911 automatic pistol, gave our Marines and soldiers decisive advantages in close combat. When battles came down to individual fights at close quarters, American forces prevailed because they carried superior weapons that functioned reliably under the worst conditions imaginable. This technical superiority, multiplied millions of times across the Pacific, helped secure our victory. The lesson for us, decades later, is clear. In any endeavor, whether military or civilian, an unwavering commitment to pragmatic design, relentless innovation, and an unyielding focus on effectiveness and reliability are the true hallmarks of success. The human element, coupled with superior tools forged from a culture of progress, will always be the decisive factor.